"We have them," an orc shouted, and Doomhammer grinned. Victory was within his grasp. The walls of the city stood firm no matter how many warriors he hurled at it, but the gates were beginning to buckle from their constant ramming. And once those fell, his warriors would pour into Capital City, crushing its remaining defenders and sacking the city. With this and the Elven Forest as bases, they could spread across the rest of the continent rapidly, driving the humans back to the shores and finally into the sea. And then the land would belong to the Horde, and they could end this war and start a new life at last. If only the ogres were here, Doomhammer thought yet again, leaning on his hammer and watching his followers strike yet again at the city's sturdy wood and iron gates. They would have been able to scale the walls and perhaps even batter holes in the thick stone with their clubs. He wondered why Gul'dan and Cho'Gall and their clans had not arrived. He had moved quickly across the mountains, he knew, but still they should have been here by now. Doomhammer, he glanced up and saw one of his warriors pointing toward the sky. More griffins? He wondered with a grimace. The feathered mounts had proven deadly in the forests of the hinterlands, and equally so at Caelth the Lost. He had only seen a handful here so far, and one had flown to the castle and back, but had not otherwise participated in the battle. But still he was wary. The Wildhammer dwarves were strong and sturdy, their mounts fast, and their stormhammers as deadly as the warhammers of his own people. They were not a foe to be taken lightly, despite their small stature, and if more were arriving, he would need to be ready. But the dark shape silhouetted against the clouds grew larger and larger, too long and sinuous for a griffin, and Doomhammer heard many of his warriors cheer as its shadow fell across them. A dragon. That was good news. The massive beast could use its flames against the gates, and to clear the castle walls of defenders. The city was as good as theirs. The dragon landed well clear of the lake, a large orc dropping from the saddle on its back as soon as it had set down, and Doomhammer strode forward, slinging his hammer back on his back. "Where is Doomhammer?" the dragon rider was demanding. "I must speak with him." "I am here," Doomhammer answered, his warriors parting to let him pass. "What is it?" The rider turned to face him, and Doomhammer realized he had seen the warrior before. He was one of Zuluhead's favorites, a powerful warrior who, according to reports, had been one of the first to dare ride the still rebellious dragons. Torghast, yes, that was his name. "I bring a message from Zuluhead," Torghast announced, a strange expression on his broad face. Doomhammer saw anger there, and confusion, and possibly shame and even fear. "Tell me then," Doomhammer replied, stepping close enough that he was within the circle of the dragon's tail as it lay coiled upon the battlefield. The other orcs nearby, recognizing this warning, backed away to give them privacy. "It is Gul'dan," Torghast said. He was a big orc, as tall as Doomhammer himself, but would not look him in the eye. "He has fled." What? And now Doomhammer understood the fear on the dragon rider's face, as he felt his blood boil with rage and his hands grip his hammer tight enough to make the wooden handle groan in protest. "When? How?" "Shortly after you left," Torghast admitted. "Cho'Gall is with him. They have the Twilight's Hammer and Stormreaver clans. They have launched the boats back into the Great Sea and are sailing south." Now he did look up, and the fear was dominated by rage. "One of my clansmen spotted them and flew down to ask why they were going the wrong way. Gul'dan killed him and used his foul magic on him. I saw it happen. I wanted to go after them, but knew Zuluhead must be told, and he ordered me to come here at once." Doomhammer nodded. "You did right," he assured the dragon rider. "If Gul'dan killed your clanmate, he would not have hesitated to kill you as well, and then we would have not known of his treachery." His lips pulled back from his teeth in a snarl. "Damn him, I knew he could not be trusted, and now he has taken the ships with him." "We can fly after him," Torghast offered. "Zuluhead said he would have the other dragon riders ready. We could burn the ships to ash and every orc on them." Doomhammer frowned. "Yes, but only if you can get close enough. Gul'dan's magic is strong, and Cho'Gall is powerful as well. He smashed his hammer to the ground. I knew those altars he created would be a problem, and I let him transform the ogres into new warriors to fill out his ranks. Doomhammer bit down hard on his lip, punishing himself for his own stupidity. He had been so excited about having new weapons for the war against the humans that he had ignored his own instincts, which had warned him the warlock would only do things for his own purposes. Torgus was awaiting an order, but both of them turned as another orc came running up. It was Tharbek, Doomhammer's young Blackrock second, and he stopped just beyond the dragon's tail, which flicked in annoyance. Yes, there's a problem, Tharbek informed him bluntly. The mountains are closed. What? Doomhammer turned and stared out past the dragon, toward the Alterac Mountains. Sure enough, he could see that the steady dark stream of orcs flowing from the southern passes had stopped. What has happened? Tharbek shook his head. I do not know, he replied, but we are no longer able to get through the passes. I have sent warriors back to scout the way, but they have not returned. His expression made it clear that they should have been back by now. Damn it, Doomhammer ground his teeth together. That human betrayed us. I knew one who would sell out his own race could not be trusted. Still, he had thought the cloaked man too frightened to turn against them. Either the Alliance had shown superior strength, or they had threatened him with something more immediate than horde domination, or they had discovered his treachery and removed him from whatever position he had held that had enabled him to control those passes. Yes, the last was the most likely. The man had seemed too eager to negotiate to back out now, especially since there would still be horde warriors nearby. He had been caught and removed, and others now controlled that mountain region. That did not change the results, however. How many orcs are trapped up there, he demanded. Tharbek shrugged. Impossible to say, he pointed out, but at least half the clan, if not more. He glanced around. We still have many warriors here, he said, and once Gul'dan and the others arrive, we will have more. Doomhammer laughed bitterly, his mind still reeling. The others are not coming. Tharbek looked surprised. Gul'dan has betrayed us, Doomhammer told his second, barely able to force out the words. He has taken the ships and the two clans with them to the Great Sea. But why? Tharbek asked, genuinely bewildered. If we lose this war, we will all be without a home, him included. Doomhammer shook his head. The war was never his first priority. His thoughts flickered back to his encounter with the warlock back in Stormwind, and what Gul'dan had said. He has found something else, something powerful, he remembered dully, something that will make him strong enough to not need the Horde for protection. What will we do? Tharbek asked. He looked over at the city beyond them, studying it anew. We may not have enough warriors to take it now, he pointed out. Doomhammer refused to look, but knew his second was right. The city had proven sturdier than expected, and its defenders fiercer. The attack from behind by the Alliance forces had also taken them by surprise, and had reduced their numbers by a large portion. And now they could no longer expect reinforcements from any direction. But that was not the only matter weighing on him. Gul'dan's treachery was bad enough, but he had taken other orcs with him. They were setting their own goals above those of the Horde, their own selfish desires above the needs of their people. That was what had driven Doomhammer to kill Blackhand and take control in the first place, and he had vowed to end the corruption and restore his people's honor. This betrayal could not be allowed to stand unanswered, no matter what it cost them, or him. Rend, maim, Doomhammer bellowed. The Blackhand brothers heard him and approached quickly, perhaps realizing from this tone that their war chief would brook no delay. Take your black-toothed grin south, Doomhammer instructed them, remembering the maps his scouts had drawn with the troll's help. March back along the lake and from there through Hillsbrad to the sea. Gul'dan has fled, but he would not have needed all the boats, not with only 2 clans. The rest of our ship should still be there waiting. He grimaced, showing his tusks. Pursue the traitors and destroy them to the last orc, leaving their bodies to sink into the water's depths. But the city, Ren protested. The war. Our people's honor is at stake, Doomhammer bellowed, raising his hammer to attack position and growling at the other chieftain, silently daring him to defy the orders. We must not allow them to go unpunished. He glared at the Black Hands. Consider this a chance to regain your honor. Then he took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. I will lead my clan south more slowly, blocking the Alliance from following you and wreaking havoc across the land as we go. We will keep the route open all the way back to the city. We will return here afterward, he assured them, and finish what we started. Though even he had his doubts about that. They had caught the city by surprise this time. That would not happen again. The Black Hands nodded, though they did not look happy. It shall be as you say, Mame agreed, and he and his brother turned away to give orders to their warriors. Doomhammer turned back to Torgus, who had stood nearby waiting. Tell Zuluhead to send all dragons to the Great Sea, he instructed the dragon rider. Fly as fast as you can. You will have your chance to avenge your clanmate's death. Torgus nodded, grinned at the thought of revenge, and turned back to his dragon, leaving Doomhammer to step back and allow the massive creature room to spread its colossal wings and take flight again. Doomhammer watched them fly away and ground his teeth again, his hands shaking with shock and rage. He had been so close. Another day at most and the city would have been his. Now that chance was gone. His odds of winning this war were slim at best, but honor had to come first. Terran Gorefiend was standing nearby, and Doomhammer rounded on the Death Knight. What of you, then, you rotting corpse? Doomhammer demanded of the creature. You followed Gul'dan once, and he has betrayed us all. Will you run to him now? The undead warrior stared at him for a moment, with those glowing eyes, and shook his head. Gul'dan has forsaken our people, Gorefiend replied. We shall not. The Horde is all, and it retains our loyalty, as do you, as long as you lead it. Doomhammer nodded briskly, surprised by the creature's response. Then go and protect our people as they retreat from the city, he ordered. Gorefiend obeyed, stalking away toward the other Death Knights and their undead steeds. Tharbek departed as well. For the moment, Doomhammer was alone. Gul'dan, he shouted, raising his hammer high and shaking it at the heavens. You will die for this. I will see you suffer for betraying our race and risking our very survival. The skies did not answer, but Doomhammer felt a little better for the proclamation. He lowered his hammer and turned back toward the war, already forcing himself to think about how best to lead his warriors down south and how to get the rest of the Horde toward the sea. Gul'dan leaned out over the prow and sniffed the sea air. He closed his eyes and allowed the mystical senses dominance, questing with his mind for the distinctive tang of magic. It hit him almost at once, so strong he could taste it like the metallic flavor of fresh blood, so powerful it made his skin tingle and his hair crackle. Stop, he shouted over his shoulder, and behind him the clansmen stopped rowing. The boat halted immediately, sitting stock still on the water, and Gul'dan smiled. We are here, he announced. But there's nothing here, one of the orcs, a member of his own Stormreaver clan, named Drakthul, declared. Gul'dan turned, opening his eyes at last, and glared at the young orc warlock. No, he grinned. Then we will weight you with chains and send you down to the bottom to explore it for us. Or would you prefer to sit here and trust that I know what I'm doing? Drakthul backed away, stammering an apology, but Gul'dan was already ignoring him. Instead, he glanced across the water to the boat next to his, and to Cho'Gall standing near its prow. Inform the others, Gul'dan told his lieutenant. We will begin at once. Doomhammer may already have learned of our departure, and I do not want to risk him interrupting us before we reach our goal. The two-headed ogre nodded and turned to shout at the next boat. which then relayed the message to the boat beyond it. Ropes were tossed across, and soon the ogre magi and the orc necromancers were climbing into Gul'dan's ship, using the ropes to pull themselves across or glide them while they swam, depending on their skill and comfort in the water. The place we seek, an ancient temple, lays below us, Gul'dan explained, when all his warlocks had gathered on the deck before him. And we could attempt to swim down to them, but I do not know how deep the waters are here. Plus, it would be dark and cold and not to my liking. He grinned. Instead, we will raise the land itself, bringing the temple to us. Can that be done? One of the new ogre magi asked. It can, Gul'dan replied. Not so long ago, on our homeworld, we orcs raised another landmass, a volcano in Shadowmoon Valley. I guided the Shadow Council then, and I will guide us now. He waited for other questions or objections, but there were none, and he nodded, pleased. His new subordinates were not only stronger than the old, but more obedient, two traits he heartily appreciated. When shall we begin? Cho'Gall finally asked. Right now, Gul'dan answered. Why wait? He turned and led the way to the ship's railing, his assistants ranging themselves to either side of him. Then he closed his eyes and began to reach out toward the power he felt resting deep below. It was easy to grasp, and once he had a firm grip upon it, Gul'dan began to tug, magically pulling the energy and its source toward him. At the same time, he reached out with his mind and cast his magic upon the power's surroundings, lifting them as well. The sky darkened overhead, and the sea around them turned rough. I have it, he told his aides through clenched teeth. Home in on my magic, and you will feel it yourself. Pour your own energies into what I have already constructed, and lift with me now. He felt the first shift as Cho'Gall and the others added their power to his own. A deep red hue suffused the sky, and thunder clapped overhead as a hard rain fell and heavy waves rocked the boat. The vast weight he had felt grew lighter, and the tugging became significantly easier. It was still a chore, but now it was bearable instead of excruciating, and with each tug, the magic's presence grew stronger, and his grasp upon it became firmer, as did his hold on the land around it. All of nature fought against him, but they held firm. For hours they stood there, unmoving in the eyes of the assembled warriors, but engaged in an active struggle against titanic forces. Water drenched them from above and below, thunder deafened them, lightning blinded them, the boats were tossed about, and warriors clutched at their oars to keep their seats. Several glanced at Gul'dan and the other warlocks for instructions, but none of them moved, even when the ship lurched alarmingly. Then a gout of fire and smoke erupted from the heaving water, a short way ahead of the lead ship, filling the air with fire and ash and steam. Through the gritty, burning air, they could see something poking up through the water, like a chick's beak piercing an egg. The something proved to be rock, and as the warriors watched, too stunned to do more than blink and gasp, it grew larger, rising rapidly from the waves as water and lava dripped down and off it. The small rock became a boulder, the boulder became a small plateau, the plateau became a wide ledge, and the ledge became a small rocky plain. Other shapes emerged as well, rising from the tumultuous sea a short ways from the first, but they all proved to be connected, and as the sea spilled away from it, the orcs could see the entire island emerging from the sea's grasp, still spouting flames and dirt and steam. A second, smaller island followed, grinding as it shifted to the surface, and then a third and a fourth. At last, as the sky overhead shifted from swirling crimson to a mere leaden gray, and the waves dropped to heights only as great as a tall ship's mast, Gul'dan's eyes opened. He staggered slightly and leaned against the railing for support, as did a few of his warlocks. But he glanced out over the new island chain, still steaming from the heat of its rapid ascent, and still growling and groaning as it settled into new configuration, and smiled. Soon, he said softly, looking upon the land and feeling it with his mind, noting the location of the place he sought. Soon I will stride across you to the temple I seek, and the great prize that lies within it. I see them, a warrior shouted. There they are, off those islands. Rend Blackhand, one of the Blacktooth Grin clan's 2 chieftains, looked where the other orc had pointed, near the place where they had seen the sea and air rolling madly as they approached. At last he saw the thin spit of land ahead into the west, and the shapes alongside it. Good, he said, nodding and resting his hands against the handle of his axe. Increase speed, he told his drummer. I want to reach them before they have a chance to disappear into some hideout there. On one of the other boats, he saw his brother Mame speak to his own drummer, no doubt giving similar instructions. What will we do if they use magic against us? One of his younger warriors asked. Several nodded in agreement. It was their single greatest fear, even beyond being captured by the Alliance and being eaten by a dragon, and Rend could hardly fault them for their concern. He was not thrilled with the idea of battling Gul'dan and his cronies. Doomhammer had given them an order, however, and the Blackhand name was at stake. Rend intended to carry that out or die trying. Their magic is potent, he admitted now, and Gul'dan himself could easily kill 3 or 4 of us within minutes. But he needs those minutes, and he needs physical contact too, or to be close by, or to have something that belongs to the intended victim, he grinned. Did any of you loan the chief warlock a water skin, or a pair of gauntlets, or a sharpening stone? That got chuckles from several, just as he'd hope. Then just steer clear of the warlocks until we are across. Do not let them close to you, and swarm over them before they can cast any spells. He tapped his axe for emphasis. Despite their powers, they are still orcs, and they can still bleed and die. This is no different from hunting an ogre back home. Each of them may be stronger than any one or even 2 of us, but we can wear them down and attack in groups and prevent them from fighting back. His warriors nodded. They understood the concept, and now that they were thinking of magic as just another weapon, it was no longer as frightening. Almost there, the helmsman announced then, and Rend glanced behind him, past the edge of his ship. The island now loomed up along one side, and Rend could tell from the size of the ships that this new land was big, bigger than most of the islands he'd already seen on this world. The boats had gone from specks to full-fledged ships, and he could clearly see orcs pouring off them and onto the dark, damp land. Rend repressed the snarl he felt building in the back of his throat and gave the order, Prepare to land. Once we do, aim for those warlocks and kill anything that gets in our way. We are not alone, Cho'Gall pointed out to Gul'dan. Their boat had finally beached on the shore of the new island, which still shuddered and threw off steam and occasional belches of fire and lava. Gul'dan followed his assistant's gesture and saw a fleet of ships approaching them from the far side of the island, his island. From the way the lead boat moved, Gul'dan could tell it was rowed rather than sailed, and that usually meant one thing: orcs. Doomhammer's troops had found them. Damn him, Gul'dan muttered. Why did he always have to be so quick to make decisions? Another day and we would have been here and done before they arrived. He sighed. Well, there is nothing for it. Tell the warriors to prepare for battle. You will need to fend them off while I enter the temple and find the tome. Cho'Gall grinned with both his heads, with pleasure. The massive 2-headed ogre was as fanatic as the rest of his clan, and firmly believed in ushering in the end of the world, preferably with violence and bloodshed. All the Twilight Hammer orcs held the same belief, and would happily fight anyone or anything if doing so would bring the world closer to its ultimate demise. It did not hurt that the demon blood most of them had imbibed back on Draenor had increased their natural bloodlust 100-fold. They will not get past us, the ogre promised, drawing the long, curved-bladed sword he wore at his side. Gul'dan nodded. Good. Then he turned and began picking his way carefully across the island, steam rising from every step he took. Drakthel and the other necromancers and ogre magi followed quickly behind him. "Attack!" Ren shouted, his axe clutched in his hands as he ran forward with his warriors. "Kill the traitors!" "Death to the traitors!" Mame echoed beside him. "To battle!" Cho'Gall bellowed. His Sith-like blade raced so its long, sharp blade caught the weak, late-afternoon sunlight. "Let this land be awash in their blood," his other head added, "that their deaths may usher in the end times." The two forces met with a thunderous impact there on the lava-strewn rocky shore, as orc slammed into orc. Weapons flashed, axes and hammers and swords and spears rising and falling, swinging and stabbing in a wild display of energy, passion, and violence. Blood sprayed everywhere, filling the thick air with a red mist and turning the nearby waves dark. The ground, still uneven and unsteady, grew slippery, and many warriors lost their balance and met their deaths while struggling to regain their feet. The battle was fierce. Cho'Gall's warriors fought savagely and with no concern for their own safety. Their only goal was to inflict as much damage and pain as possible. Doomhammer's soldiers fought for revenge and for justice, avenging Gul'dan's betrayal and the battle it had already cost them. Both sides believed in their goals, and neither was willing to yield. The one difference between the two sides was numbers. Gul'dan had brought only 2 clans with him, his own Storm Reavers and Cho'Gall's Twilight Hammers. His Storm Reavers were the smallest clan, and they were all warlocks. Every single one of them was with Gul'dan now, leaving only the Twilight Hammers to block Doomhammer's forces. Rend and Mame Blackhand had brought the bulk of their Blacktooth Grin clan, and one of the largest in the Horde. The Twilight Hammer warriors were outnumbered and they knew it, and as the battle continued and both sides suffered heavy casualties, the difference began to show. The fanatic orc warriors refused to surrender, however, and fought to the last orc. They took many of Doomhammer's warriors with them. Cho'Gall himself cut one of the strongest Blacktooth Grin's right arm from him as he fell. Both of the orc warriors' axes buried in his chest, and another Blacktooth Grin lost an eye to a well-aimed blow from the back spike on a war axe. But in the end, the fiery shore was littered with bodies, and only the troops the Black Hands had led here still remained. "Now," Rend said, wiping his axe clean on a fallen orc's chest, blood still dripping from a long gash across his chest, "we go after Gul'dan. The warlock has much to answer for." Gul'dan was standing at the base of an ancient temple, its outer walls barely visible beneath centuries of moss, fungus, coral, and barnacles. He could still see traces of architecture that matched what he glimpsed in Cael Thalas, both in grandeur and in style. Elves had crafted this structure, and once it had been beautiful and ornate, he was sure. Now, however, its walls were rough and rolling, and the edifice resembled a natural mound of dirt and seaweed and incrustations rather than something that had been built deliberately. But the appearance did not matter to him. What excited him was the pulsing he could feel just behind his eyes. As the power tugged at him so strongly, he could almost see its influence quivering the building around it. "Inside," he told Drakthel and the others. "We must go inside." He had debated bringing them beyond the temple's front steps, actually. He knew that the tome of Sargeras lay within, and that the eye of Sargeras housed within could be tapped for immense godlike powers. But would he be able to do so alone, or would he be forced to share that potency with the rest of the Shadow Council? What had decided him finally was that he did not know what else the ancient temple might contain. Thus Gul'dan had felt it was best to bring his servants and assistants with him into the temple. If necessary, he could always kill them when they reached the tome itself. Entering cautiously, Gul'dan created a globe of green light to better see his surroundings. The halls and rooms here were as altered as the building's exterior. The floors coated with sand and grit and seaweed. The walls festooned with more weeds and more shells of various sorts and sizes. Even the doorways had been altered, their outlines smooth and rounded and distorted by the creatures that clung to them for all these long years. Quickly, you fools, he told his clanmates impatiently. Fan out and search for the primary passageway. We must reach the Chamber of the Eye before the tomb's guardians awake. And guardians? One of the warlocks, Urluk Cloudkiller, asked hesitantly. You said nothing of guardians. Spineless cowards, Gul'dan railed, slapping the cowering Urluk across the face. I said move. His rage mobilized them, at least temporarily, overpowering their fear of this strange place and the horrors it might contain. And the warlocks began searching through the building. Finally, they found a wide central corridor and proceeded along it. As they ventured farther in, however, the depredations lessened. Now Gul'dan could see the fine carvings on the columns and pillars, and the delicate engravings along the walls, as well as the beautiful mosaics that made up the floors and ceilings. Any paint had long since been destroyed by the salt water, of course, but there was still enough decoration to see how beautiful this building had been, a truly elaborate and ornate temple that would have impressed even the most jaded visitors. Gul'dan had eyes for none of it, however. He was interested in one thing and one thing only, and that was the magic waiting for him in the vault at the very bottom. When he finally reached the vault door, he paused, savoring the moment. Now, Sargeras, he whispered, I will claim whatever is left of your power and bring this wretched world to its knees. He could feel the energy already, and it was enough to make his senses dance and his mind quiver in anticipation. The ball of green light, no larger than his hand when he first conjured it, was now twice the size of his head, and made up of roiling green fire, so bright he could not bear to look at it directly, and so hot he had to keep it to the center of the hall lest it melt its way through a wall. And this was from mere proximity to the source. What would he be capable of once he actually touched the power and absorbed it fully into himself? Wrapped in these thoughts, Gul'dan motioned the others back, and they obediently retreated to the far side of the room. Then he reached out and grasped the heavy stone handle of the massive black iron vault door. It was one of the only places in the entire temple that was unadorned, and its stark simplicity gave it a grandeur the statues and carvings lacked. Clearly, it said, here was a place too important for such fripperies. Eager to see what that place contained, Gul'dan tugged the handle down with all his strength. He felt a stick from centuries of disuse, and also felt a prickle as a spell washed over him. It was not harmful, more a spell trigger than a spell itself, but he could sense the much larger and far more potent spell linked behind it. But the initial spell swept through him and then back out again, and its mate lay untriggered, just as Sargeras had assured him it would. Agwyn had warded this vault against intrusions by humans, elves, dwarves, even gnomes, against every race in short. Beyond the doorway lay a darkness that even Gul'dan's light could not penetrate, a darkness so cold it froze his fingers numb in an instant and turned his breath to ice. And slowly that darkness took form, coalescing into discrete shapes, scuttling, crawling, writhing shapes with eyes that glowed darker than the rest. So dark it hurt to look upon them. And then these dark shapes smiled as they approached the vault door and exited their eternal prison, advancing upon the stunned Gul'dan and his warlocks. Demons, but none like he had seen before. Gul'dan thought he had faced terrible creatures in the past, but these made all others seem mere shadows, harmless and easily dispelled. No, Gul'dan screamed in his mind. unable to make his mouth work to form the word out loud. This is not how it's supposed to happen. Sargeras promised. He tried to summon his magic, to raise his hands, to run, to do anything, but the mere sight of the beings before him had paralyzed him, body and soul, and he who thought himself master could do nothing but stare and shudder as they crept toward him, their shadowy claws reaching out to caress his face. That first touch was enough to break his paralysis, and Gul'dan found himself running, falling in his haste to be away from this nightmarish place. Drakthal and the others had been standing right behind him. Now they were nowhere to be seen. They must have already fled. Screams echoed up from the vault as Gul'dan too raced through corridor after corridor. His face burned where the claws had touched him, and it was only after he raised one hand to his cheek that he realized he had been cut there, and deeply. "Damn you, Sargeras," he cursed, as he stumbled past columns and pillars, through rooms and alcoves. "I won't be beaten like this. I am Gul'dan. I am darkness incarnate. It cannot end like this." He paused to catch his breath and to listen behind him. Nothing. The screams had stopped. Blasted, feeble-minded weaklings, he thought, picturing the storm reavers who had followed him down there. They're all likely dead by now. His cheek was throbbing now, and he pressed his hand against it, trying to staunch the blood that was leaking from the wound. He was beginning to feel dizzy, and his limbs felt weak. Still, I must press on, he told himself grimly. My power alone should be enough to... Gul'dan stopped speaking to listen carefully. What was that sound? It was faint and repetitious, and made his skin crawl, but it carried both cruelty and amusement. That laughter? Is that you, Sargeras? He demanded. You seek to mock me? We'll see who laughs last, demon, when I claim your burning eye for my own. He turned a corner and found himself in a wide room, its walls surprisingly blank, inspired by something he could not name. Gul'dan crossed to the nearest wall and began writing upon it, scrawling his description of the vault and its guardians with its own blood. Several times he faltered, his hand too heavy to lift. Ambushed by the guardians, he wrote heavily. I'm dying. He knew it was true, and struggled to finish writing his tale before death claimed him. But behind him he could already hear the same dry, hungry scrabbling he had heard inside the vault. They were coming for him. If my servants had not abandoned me, he wrote, his eyes barely able to focus now, his throat too tight to form words. But he realized now that it was not their fault. It was his own. All this time he had thought he was in control, when in truth he had been little more than a dupe, a pawn, a slave. His very existence had been a sham, a mere joke, and soon it would be over. I've been a fool, he thought. He stopped writing and turned to run, knowing that it was already too late. And then the claws bit in deep, and Gul'dan found his voice long enough to scream. Ren put out an arm and stopped Mame from going any further. No, he said softly, blood still seeped from beneath the rough binding he had fashioned from a fallen warrior's belt. We need to go after Gul'dan, Mame insisted, though he swayed from his own wounds, and the rough bandages wrapped around one leg and shoulder were already soaked through with blood. There is no need, his brother assured him. Those creatures have finished the task for us. Something strange had emerged from the building before them, something with too many limbs and too many joints and altogether too many teeth. It had been followed by others, and they had attacked the orcs without pause, tearing into them like hunger-crazed animals set upon fresh prey. Several orcs had been frozen with fear at the sight of these terrible creatures, but others had fought back, and they had finally destroyed the last one. Though it had taken enough wounds to slay a dozen orcs before it finally stopped thrashing and biting. And these creatures had come from within that building. Though only a warrior, Rend had a tenuous feel for magic, and he could sense the magic within the strange old structure before them. It was powerful, immensely so, and evil beyond imagining. It was filled with hatred, intense and directed towards anything living. Those creatures had only been the barest hint of its strength. Then something knocked them off their feet, a deafening noise from the building's entrance, and a deep rumble like laughter from somewhere far below. Air rushed from the structure, fetid and foul, and something else with it, something that made Ren's hackles rise. He did not see anything, but he was sure he had felt evil itself flowing from that strange place, exploding outward and then unraveling in the warm sunlight. The rumble continued, however, and now the ground was shaking. Cracks began to appear in the rocks beneath their feet. The whole island was coming apart. Gul'dan is no longer a threat, Ren said as he clambered back to his feet, and somehow he knew it was true. Whatever Gul'dan had hoped to find here, he had found only his own death. Ren only hoped it had been slow and painful. He was almost certain that that had been the case. "What do we do now then?" Mame asked as they turned away, leaving the temple behind them. "We return to Doomhammer," Ren told him. "We still have a war to fight, and now at least we will not need to worry about traitors sapping our strength from within. Let him find fault with that if he dares." Together the brothers made their way back toward the shore, and the boats waiting there.